Good evening. There we go. Good evening. I'd like to call the West Ada School District Board meeting to order. It is Monday, June 13th at 6:07. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are not.
All right, thank you. We will now move to our newly elected Zone 4 trustee. Mr. Bonetti, would you like to come down in front?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Can we just state for the record where Trustee Bacleon is?
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, Trustee Bacleon, unfortunately, is stuck in Washington State and is excused this evening. All right, now we'll move forward with Mr. Bonetti. I want to welcome you, David. He's being sworn in this evening as Zone 4 trustee. He's been married to his lovely wife, Antonia, for 20 years and has 2 children in the district, one in 8th and one in 5th grade. We're very excited to have him as part of the board and look forward to working with him. At this time, sir, I'll ask that you raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, David Bonetti.
I, Dave Bonetti.
Do swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
Do swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of Idaho.
And the Constitution of the State of Idaho.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
Of the Office of Trustee of Joint School District Number 2.
Of the Office of School District Trustee of Joint School District Number 2.
West Ada School District.
West Ada School District.
In Ada and Canyon Counties, State of Idaho.
In Ada and Canyon Counties, State of Idaho.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my abilities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now our clerk will present you with the Code of Ethics to review and sign, and you're welcome to take your time with that.
I'm quite familiar with them, thanks.
I kind of suspected that. Certainly.
All righty. Thank you so much.
So sorry about that.
Because I'm like,
I apologize. We are good. We are. I apologize.
You don't need to worry.
You don't need to apologize. You're great. All right, so Trustee Bonetti just came up, but we're going to congratulate him on being the newest trustee of the West Ada School Board. All right, and with that, we will turn time over to Dr. Bubb for the superintendent update.
Madam Chair, trustees, thank you so much. I'm going to start with introduction. We'll start with our introduction of Central Academy's new principal, so I will turn it over to Mr. Jeff Stans.
Good evening. Madam Chair, trustees, and Superintendent Dr. Bubb. It is my honor to bring forward to you a recommendation for the next principal of Central Academy. And before I do, I would like to thank several people who are instrumental in the principal selection process. Region directors, thank you for your assistance with the candidate screener interviews. Dr. Bubb and the executive team, thank you for your time and dialogue during the candidate interview process. Central Academy parents and students, thank you for taking time to answer the principal input surveys. Central Academy staff, thank you for completing the principal input survey and for meeting with me individually. I'm so impressed by the culture you foster, your dedication to your students, and your desire to keep Central moving in the right direction. And last, thank you to the current principal, Donnell McNeil, for your 8 years of service, leadership, and steadfast dedication to the students of Central Academy. I learned many things about Central Academy during my visit a few weeks ago. One thing that stands out is that you have had a large impact on the Central Academy community. A positive and supportive culture, one that accepts all students, does not happen by accident. It is created and fostered by a leader who works diligently to ensure that all students learn and succeed, is supportive of staff, and equips staff so they can best serve the students. Mr. McNeil, your presence and unmistakably rich, deep voice will be missed. Quick review of our process that we use for Central Academy for this selection. As I mentioned before, we surveyed students, parents, and staff to identify the desired characteristics and skills for the next leader. All three groups express the same desired characteristics and top skill. All want a leader who is supportive and understanding, with the top skill being a strong communicator. As I said before, I spent a day at Central Academy and met individually with staff to hear more about what they want and need in a leader, as well as to understand their vision for the school. One of their employees is here tonight. I'll just have her stand. Ms. Poff, thank you. And I appreciate their time that they spent with me. So on behalf of the executive team, it is my honor to recommend Heath McInerney to be the next principal for Central Academy. Mr. McInerney has served the West Ada School District his entire career, which spans 31 years. He began his career as a social studies and speech teacher at Centennial High School and taught at Centennial for 6 years. He was an assistant principal at Eagle High School for 9 years, an assistant principal at Mountain View High School for 16 years, and an assistant principal at Hawaii High School for 1 year. During his interview with the executive team, Mr. McInerney stated many times that his desire is to be a champion for kids. I can testify, having known Mr. McInerney for most of my career, that he has always been a champion for kids. He is also very humble and readily admits that he has much to learn, but is ready to embrace the challenge and to learn from the staff. Now, I will stop talking and allow Mr. McInerney to come forward to make a few remarks.
Hello, Madam Chair, trustees, and Dr. Bubb. It's a pleasure. I'm very humbled and honored to be the next principal at Central. As Mr. Stan says, I've been in the district for a while now. I've had a lot of experience. This is going to be a new journey for me, and I'm excited, and I'm wanting to make a big influence on all the kids that I come in contact with, and also with my colleagues that'll be there as well, as being the teachers. We'll definitely work together to make a difference in their lives. So, yeah.
All right, thank you so much. As a parent of a student at Owyhee, I'm sorry to see you leave Owyhee, but I'm so excited for Central Academy. You'll be an amazing asset there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All right.
This was like a compliment.
Next up, I will have, oh, she's hiding behind the pillar there. Next up, I'll have Lisa Hale come up to speak a little bit about Ustick Elementary.
Good evening, Chairman Frazier, trustees, and Dr. Bubb. It is an honor to represent the staff and student learners at USTIC Elementary School. Before I share the recommendation from the executive team for building principal, I would like to recognize the professionalism and dedication of the USTIC Elementary staff and Mr. Jason Newell. Jason Newell's 6 years as principal and 15 years overall at USTIC Elementary was spent doing true servant leadership, and we thank him and wish him the very best in his new adventures. We also want to thank the USTIC Elementary staff and parents who provided insight and focus on the mission, vision, values, and goals of USTIC. We surveyed both staff and parents to assess what they wanted in a leader, and I also spent time at USTIC meeting with staff to discuss their needs within the building. I want to share my thanks with the region directors for their assistance in the screening interviews of the candidates, and thanks also goes out to Dr. Bubb and members of the executive team for their discernment and dialogue during the final interview process. With that, it is an honor to recommend Heidi Jackman-Ron as the next principal at USTIC Elementary. Ms. Jackman-Ron is currently the Director of Federal Programs in the Nampa School District. She will be joining the West Ada community with a wealth of experience in teaching, behavioral and academic intervention, instructional coaching, and educational leadership. Heidi is a leader who settles for nothing but excellence for all learners and is very excited to join and support the USTIC community. Ms. Jackman-Ron is highly skilled at establishing and supporting collaborative and reliable systems where students and adults, no matter what their needs, are learning at high levels. Upon your approval, we are looking forward to celebrating USTIC Elementary alongside the leadership of Principal Heidi Jackman-Ron. Heidi has joined our meeting this evening with her 2 sons and has a few comments, as well as will respond to any questions you may have. Heidi? Congratulations. Yay.
Madam Chair, Trustees, and Dr. Bubb, thank you so much for having me. I am truly honored to be considered for this position, and just my time in Nampa has been amazing, and I'm excited to take all of that and bring it here. So.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. Can you introduce your kids? We'd love to.
Yes. So
know
this
them.
is Zevin. Do you want to come up? You can. So this is Zevin. He is in 3rd grade at Eagle Elementary, just finished, he's going to head into 4th grade. And this is Brody. He is heading into 1st grade.
Awesome. Well, Evan and Brody, we're excited to have your mom. And yeah, I just want to welcome you as a family to West Ada. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are very excited.
Yep, Madam Chair, Trustees, I just want to touch on a couple probably more public information pieces. We are really excited to be introducing a new website coming up here pretty quick. We sat down as a team back in January. It feels like a long time ago, but back in January we sat down as a team, or maybe even December, sat down as a team and really wanted to figure out what West Ada needed when it comes to communication via our website, and we figured out, hey, the committee decided we really need to have a West Ada School District app that parents can download and get instantaneous updates on events and things like that. Our students can download it. It can be school specific. We can also reach out to parents through that. So that's a big piece of what we were looking for. We also wanted to organize our website in a different way. If you haven't been on our website, there's times when I look through the website and I can't find things, and I know I probably put it on the website, so maybe that's why I can't find it. But we really wanted to be able to organize that in a more effective manner, and then clearly communicate our product. I will just tell you, I think our communications team has done a tremendous job working on coming up with a mantra or a platform for us to get out what we're doing in West Ada, from Ken's videos to just our newsletters to our social media platform. I think we've done a tremendous job, but we wanted one place where you could house that. And so that was really what we were looking for. And so we decided to go with a website called Aptigee, and Aptigee is going to be a smooth transition. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a smooth transition. That's really wishful thinking. I think it'll be a really smooth transition as we move over to this. The go date is July 1st. There's been a lot of people have had their hands on this. I'm going to recognize our entire communications team, but really Nikki Sheppers has taken this on as something that kind of has been her pet, and we appreciate her for that. It's been a long process, but we're excited to see what this offers, not just for our schools, but for our district as we communicate that. We recognize that for some people, our website is their first interaction with West Ada School District. For some people, the only interaction they have with West Ada School District is our website. We feel like that really needs to encompass what we have as a school district and what we offer, and so that will be the goal with this new platform. I'm sure there will be bumps. Be patient with us. We have planned for a July 1 rollout, so that way we have a little bit of time over the summer to make sure it's rocking and rolling by the time school gets back in session and we have a really good, effective way of communicating through our website. In addition to that, you could see a slight change if you really like to get on our board agendas. They're now going to be offered through a company called Simbly. Simbly is really it's an efficiency piece for the board to communicate with myself, with other members of the district office. For the patron that's looking at it, they'll just go in, they'll log into Simbly to pull down the agenda, and they don't even have to log in. They just say they're going to enter in as a guest, and then the agenda will be there, and we'll be able to update it on a regular basis. So the goal of that, of both of those, is to communicate better with our patrons. So we're excited about that. The last thing I'm going to say, or I'll let you go ahead. Okay, the last thing I was going to say is just it is School Board Member Appreciation Month, and I will just tell you, I come to work and am extremely fortunate to work with a really, really fine group of individuals as a board. We know that we've had some transition in the board. It's always great to get people that are dedicated. I will just tell you, finding board members, people that want to volunteer, I want to make that really, really clear, volunteer their time, that are going to take part in really tough decision making, that are going to take part in graduations across the entire district, which everybody was able to do, and really going to take part in providing a strategic plan that's going to guide this district and this community to make sure that we're producing kids that are of high need in our community is remarkable. I can't say enough how appreciative I am. I know that the executive team would echo those same pieces, and I know that when I hear from teachers, they feel that same way. I appreciate the fact that many of you are out at events that are way above and beyond what your responsibilities are, and I appreciate that. Our community appreciates that, and I know our teachers appreciate that. So I just want to take a minute to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bubb. That was very sweet of you. All right, let's move forward with our agenda. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to open the budget hearing. Trustee Redford?
Motion to open the budget hearing.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We will now open the budget meeting. With that, we will turn some time over to our Chief Operations Officer, Jonathan Gillian. And I am very excited.
Chair, trustees, Dr. Bubb. So I'm here we talked a little bit a couple weeks ago that this would be the night we'd have the hearing. And so that's the plan this evening, is that we're going to cover the 21-22 amended budget, and we're also going to talk a little bit about 22-23 and the proposed. If I could, before we begin, I guess I'd like to take a little bit of personal privilege and just send a thank you. So there is someone sitting in the back here, Miss Gloria Rowan. Gloria, could you raise your hand so everybody knows who you are? So I get the luxury of coming before you every couple of weeks, especially during this time of year, and talking about the budget. And sharing about all the great things that we're going to do as a district and how we're utilizing the resources we have. But really the person who does a lot of this work, and it goes very unnoticed, is Gloria. And so we are so lucky. She has been with the district for numerous years. I won't quote the number, Gloria, just for that purpose. We receive budget awards every year because of the great work she does. And so I would not be able to do this job. You would not see this document before you. We would not be having this conversation if it wasn't for the work she did. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you. And now, let's move on with the budget. All right, so what are we going to cover? We're going to discuss the amended budget first. So we're going to talk about the 21-22 budget. I'm going to give you some highlights. We're going to walk through the general fund first. I'm going to talk about some major changes. Then we're going to talk about other funds. Remember, we've had a lot of conversation about special revenue funds, so this is where we'll, again, keep applying that knowledge. You'll see a copy of the amended budget. We'll talk about next steps. I have added a slide since we last spoke. I gave you guys a handout. We're going to walk through just some of the differences, specifically in the amended budget. The documents we use don't show the difference. So that meant all of you guys had to play mental math all weekend. So there was a question asked, and I went through and put those together, and I'll walk through some specifics of those as well. So if there is one that I don't hit as part of the process and discussion, feel free to ask as we finish the amended, and I can walk through that. So in the general fund, so when we talk about the budget, we need to remember that changes will happen. If you remember right now, we are going to pass the 22-23 budget, and then we're going to probably have the same conversation about the 22-23 budget next June. So right now, we're taking a look at a budget we proposed 12 months ago with the plan that we thought we were going to live within. And so as you would anticipate, just like in your home financials in an organization like this, things changed. And so that's why we come back. We take a look at the amended budget. There are some things that happen during the year that you approve throughout the year, and this is more of a true-up process. So we talked a little bit about when we received federal funds, and we had that substitute recruitment money, and we issued some stipends associated with that. That was a board action. They approved that. Essentially now this is the budget cleanup portion of that process where we walk through it. There's some other federal funding. That is typically not a standard practice for us. We don't get a lot of extra additional funding dollars other than changes in enrollment, but because of the wealth of federal funding that's been flowing through, we have had some adjustments, and so we'll walk through those. So as you can see on the screen, as you look at a lot of the budget changes, the major things you're going to see is we had a change in fund balance. If you remember during this time last year, we talked about transfers, and we talked about where we were going to set aside dollars in reserve funds, and we were going to set those aside because we know we have some expenses coming in really high cost areas, specifically information technology and our textbooks, and so our curriculum adoptions. And so specifically, you would anticipate, actually, so this is exactly where we adopted a budget, and then we calculated now what our transfers are, and so now our amended budget would reflect those transfers, which is why you see a change or a reduction. Some of the other things you'll notice are base support and salary-based apportionment increased. And so you'll notice an increase in the state revenue dollars we received. As you would anticipate, this would be an adjustment because we went from attendance last year. When we built the budget 12 months ago, we were living under attendance, and that changed to enrollment. And so our state funding went up. Our expenses also went up as well, so don't get super excited. There are also a lot of dollars associated with that change as well. And then lastly, you'll notice that our transfers went up. So those were the three major areas on the general fund, and that really was driven off of we anticipated transfers coming in, so from other funds. We anticipated we were going to spend some levy textbook adoption dollars in the general fund. We ended up not having to make that transfer, and so those dollars will essentially go back to that fund starting next year. So now on the expenditure side, I think what we've talked a little bit about, hopefully this will give you some context now that you've kind of seen the 22-23 budget and how it is we spend our dollars. So when we go through and identify salary increases, so we've talked a little bit during the budget process this year about a 7% increase allocated to us for classified staff and admin. You got an opportunity during the last board meeting to talk about the negotiated agreement. When we allocate salary dollars in our budget, we essentially place them into, I'll call them essentially holding buckets. Specifically, usually they hang out in, if you can see on the side, those function codes 512 and 515. We'll place them there initially. And then what will happen during the year is we'll actually do an allocation based on actual expenses. And so you would anticipate that we're going to have some changes, right? So we've allocated the salary increases, and now we've identified where everybody is, where everybody works, and then what happens and where the location codes are and what the teacher type is. And so then we allocate that salary increase out during the year. It doesn't have an impact on the overall budget, but it does change each of those individual line items. And so that's what happens during the year is we have those adjustments, and now we're kind of truing that up as part of the budget process. Additionally, during the year, we also increased classified salaries, all dollars that were available within the budget. But again, that true up and that allocation of expenses creates budget adjustments. And so as we go through now to finish out the year, we'll make adjustments to those so that we can fix them moving forward. Those were substantially the increases you're going to see. Most of them were salary-based. We did have some FTE adds, specifically at the secondary level. We identified some extra staff that we needed in the instructional area. Business operations typically always goes down, so that's the 651 area. That's kind of the budget that I oversee. And what will happen with that is that we'll have workers' comp essentially sitting in a holding account, and then we'll allocate it out to departments as costs are incurred. So every year we would anticipate that one will start out high and will end the year lower. And so then the costs are then split out across other departments and allocated. The whole budget doesn't change again, but within the budget it does. And so we go through and make these adjustments and propose them as part of the year-end process. So transfers out, you will notice a request for an amendment again for this year. So much like the conversation that we had last year, if we have additional dollars available above and beyond the fund balance, requirements that are identified in our policy, we're going to look to set aside those dollars for the additional costs and the big picture purchase items that we have coming forward. So specifically, I think technology is kind of the easiest one to understand. When we switch to one-to-one, we have a lot of additional costs you would anticipate associated with the replacement of those devices. And that's not just, so in the neighborhood of, we'll just use a number around $15 million was the last time that we kind of looked at calculations. We obviously, in the single year of the budget, wouldn't be able to come up with that kind of dollars. We don't have those dollars allocated. So what we're trying to do is really plan for the future. And so what we do with this allocation of the reserve funds is that we'll essentially start planning for the future for things such as technology, those that needs will have textbook adoption, so curricular adoptions. If those costs come up, we'll have some dollars set aside. And then we have also talked about a facility construction reserve. And so I'll talk a little bit about this one because this one is a new opportunity should the board choose to like to do that. Essentially, we have some dollars allocated where then if we want to do work in advance of perhaps a bond being prepared, we can do some of those costs. We can have perhaps an architect come on to be able to do some building evaluation and what the facility and site would look like. That wouldn't have an impact on the general fund. Essentially, we would create a revolving fund that would then be reimbursed if the bond should pass and taxpayers choose to move forward. So we would set aside a one-time dollar amount that would allow us to do that, and then that'll create that revolving fund. So what you see right now is a calculation of what potentially could be the transfer identified in the amended budget. The next step for this is we actually walk through the audit process. We finish drafting the financial statements. That's what the finance office will work on all summer. And then we will bring back to the board what the dollar amounts actually were as we finish the calculations for the audit process. So in the other funds, you're going to hear some of the same kind of things. So much like those same salary increases, those will have impacts. There were some other revenue increases. So local revenue did go up, specifically driven off of two things. Some land sales were incurred during the year. So if you remember, the IFA facility was sold. Once that occurred, obviously we need to adjust the budget for that. And then specifically, there was some land sold out in Star area that the district owned. And so those were additional revenues that were incurred. And you would notice that towards the line on other local. And then specifically also, we had changes in, it's not E-rate funding, it's essentially ECS funding, but it's in the same boat as E-rate funding. If you remember, we received additional dollars to replace some of our devices. So we're going to be able to purchase a lot of additional devices, basically do that refresh right now on the federal dollars we have, which means that those reserve fund dollars, we can take a little bit longer time to build up that fund because we've essentially been able to replace our fleet with federal funding, and so that buys us a little bit more time on that replacement cost. And then federal funding went up as we made adjustments for ESSER funding, and then state and local relief funding, that's the SLRF, which is essentially those funding streams associated with the substitute recruitment and with the other dollars that were allocated from the governor's office to the district. And so again, those decisions were all made separately, and this is really just a budget cleanup portion of that process. When you have the revenues, you will also have the expenditures associated with it. So you're going to have ESSER 2 expenditure impact. We're going to spend dollars on elementary and secondary, some of those federal funding, the allocation of special education and instructional improvement dollars, all again things that were part of our ESSER funding plan as we walked through the process. We also discussed just in general, this picture you're seeing here is all funds, so that includes the general fund. So any of the impacts in the general fund would show up here, including adjustments for administrative technology. And then again, you're going to see the transfers. The transfers out in this case will be bigger than what you saw on the previous page, Same basic idea. What now this encompasses is essentially all of our transfers across all of our funds. So if we have another fund, a special revenue fund that transferred money to a different special revenue fund, you would get to see it here. And so essentially that's why that number gets inflated, but it's the same process, walking through approvals and board approval for that. So let's talk about the handouts you have before you. So it should be a document that is, it's got basically a lot of the same pages you saw on the PowerPoint. I just added a difference. So I'd love to say it's so much cooler. It's really not. I just calculated the difference for you so that you wouldn't have to do it yourself and try to identify. So I'm going to go over a couple of them that I identified as bigger ones. And so really you noticed a change in fund balance. Again, that really is driven off of, as we look at it, we projected a certain number of fund balance. Then we approved to do those transfers, and so that reduced the fund balance. So again, a lot of that gap. We've talked a little bit about state funding, which was a big change associated with really the change from ADA to enrollment. And then really you'll start to notice items such as special education went up roughly $1.1 million. Attendance area went up $345,000. Educational media, school admin, all of those were driven off the two components of the salary increase. So again, an allocation of those expenses to those departments. So you're going to see it look like an increase because somewhere else the expenses were reduced. And then also we just had an increase in those classified expenses as well associated with the pay increase. And really, the only other one that was really big when you look at all of the funds, you'll see other federal went up. And so that was roughly a $14.7 million change. Again, numerous components to that. The ESSER funding that we received was a rather large increase in adjustment to the budget as we kind of finalized what that looks like, how we're going to allocate those dollars, what it is we're going to receive. We've been able to continue to gather information. We have received some funding specifically from health and welfare. And so that's allocated with testing, and so they provided us some dollars to be able to allocate for reimbursement for those. And then of course we had some summer stimulus funding and the COVID funding, all dollars dispersed from the governor's office that as they flow through, they adjust up our federal revenues and our expenditures. So the amended budget was published as part of the 22-23 published budget. So that was given and available in the paper, so you can see a copy of it here. Again, that's kind of a summary budget. Process from here. Should you approve the budget tonight, that amended budget, then what happens is Gloria and I send a bunch of information over to the State Department. They get an opportunity to look at that budget, and essentially it's finalized and locked in for the year. And with that, I can stand for questions on the 21-22 budget amendment.
All right, thank you so much, Jonathan. That is a lot of work. All right, any questions or comments? Trustee Benetti.
This button?
Yes, there you
Okay, very good. So I think these questions are applicable to both amended and regular, but since we have to approve the amended first, I'll just at least ask two of them now. I guess the third one will be relevant later. But I'm trying to come from my own world of corporate, right? And so these don't look like the GAAP finances that, which I understand. But when I look at the unappropriated balance, that strikes as like a retained earnings or, profit if you had a profit. So how does that, is that what's the carryover and then considered revenue for the next year, essentially? And what purposes do they serve?
Yeah. Chair and Trustee Benetti, thank you for the question. So yes, for not being in governmental, that is exactly how it works. Okay. So essentially the unappropriated ending fund balance is, if you were to match it to a corporate term, we'd use terms like retained earnings, we'd use terms like equity. Those are really the generated additional revenues over expenses since inception. And so the reason why you have a fund balance like that is really to help with managing cash flow within the organization so that you can be able to make things such as payroll, right? And be able to manage those because, again, the revenues don't flow always at the same time your expenses do. And so that fund balance will allow us to manage that. In governmental accounting, which is unusual, and so governmental accounting has some specific rules about how you budget for that. You essentially pick up that fund balance as revenues the following year. So you're going to see them sit down below, and then you're going to see them pop right back up on the top, and there'll be revenues for the following year, and then you'll see another different number flow through on the end as the unappropriated ending fund balance the following year.
So in that sense, it doesn't really accrue. It's more just like working capital.
Yes.
Okay, great. And second question. So just looking at it operationally, if you look at an operational breakdown, just rough percentages, it appears that, and if we're just focusing on the general fund, I know special fund and debt, like those are different, but for the general fund, it looks like it's approximately roughly 85% to salaries and benefits just for staff and teaching staff, and then about 10% for transportation and 5% for everything else. And that's the area that you get to play with.
Yeah. So Chair and trustees, yes. So 85%, much like I presented at the last board meeting, we talk about salaries and benefits. That 10% is purchase services, substantially made up of transportation, since that's a $15 million portion of our contract on a budget basis. And then you do have the supplies, and then you have a little bit of, in the general fund, a little bit of capital. It's a couple $100,000.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, carry on.
Perfect. All right, so I will move on to the 22-23 budget. So we're going to spend a little bit of time. What you're going to notice with this one, we've spent a lot of time talking about the numbers. You've seen lots of numbers on PowerPoint slides. So I did try to change it up a little bit. We're going to have some graphs. We're going to have some pictures. Hopefully it'll give you a little bit of different context for how we spend our dollars. Again, we're going to talk about the general fund. We're going to talk about special revenue funds. Specifically, we're going to walk through state funding. You'll see a lot of some of the same information when it comes to federal programs and other funds. And then, again, you'll get an opportunity to see the publication itself. So remember, the driver of our revenues are essentially two major components: the enrollment increase of 600 students that we're anticipating for the following year, and then a change from ADA to enrollment. And so we talked a little bit about that, hey, I thought we already changed from ADA to enrollment in 21-22. Well, again, that was a temporary rule, and that temporary rule was renewed. So now going into this year, we'll basically be budgeting based on enrollment, whereas in the previous years, we budgeted based on attendance because that's what we knew, and then as the temporary rule was passed, we adjusted to enrollment. So here you're going to see there's a picture of our general fund revenues. You'll notice that a substantial chunk of it is based on state revenue. We have about 6% associated with local property taxes. And then we have that beginning fund balance, which essentially was the unappropriated ending from last year that's now working its way back up into revenues this year. So again, major changes, the shift from ADA to enrollment, that insurance discretionary. And so we've had a lot of conversations about that, roughly $12 million, and what it is we're going to do with those dollars. That's why you'll see some changes in expenses, where we'll be identifying an increase in expenditures, specifically in the business operations line item for the insurance allocation and how it is we're going to use that. And then what will happen is we've also identified, since that was really the only major increase, we've identified some set-asides, specifically a discretionary set-aside and a salary set-aside for us to help manage changes in our budget, inflationary pressures associated with this. So again, that's what kind of the increase with the insurance discretionary. And then with any increase in support units, remember we had that budget 101, we talked about revenues, we talked about support units, we kind of walked through that. This is the benefits portion of those associated with that. Other local revenue changes, again, we have budgeted for what is called an emergency levy, and that's based on our enrollment increase. Again, as part of the budget process, we can put that in. That decision will actually happen again in August. So we'll have another chance to really talk about what that looks like, the impact that may have on the budget. By then, we'll have a better understanding of what enrollment looks like. So we'll make sure that we have the enrollment increase year over year to be able to do an emergency levy. We can talk about what the number looks like, and you'll also get a chance to be able to see that and identify it. And then what you'll notice if you had followed through some of the changes, we did have a reduction in the transfers in. I talked about in 21-22, we allocated dollars for the textbook levy, or textbook adoption. Essentially that went away, and so it went back down to a normal transfer in. And transfers in are essentially indirect costs associated with federal programs that reimburse the general fund. So essentially it covers some of the overhead costs associated with operating a federal program. So general fund expenditures. This is just a breakdown. What you see is that, as you would anticipate, substantially all of our expenses are focused on the instructional support. So salary and benefit increases, we've talked a lot about what those look like. You got a chance to review and approve the negotiated agreement. That dollar's been identified, classified in admin. We receive roughly 7% increase in that index that we receive from the state. And so our expectation is that we'll be using those dollars. We are still having some conversations about, is there more we can do? And so we'll continue to take a look at that and see what budgeted resources we have available and see if we can continue to perhaps add to beyond the 7%. I think we'll still have some of those conversations internally. Whether we choose to do that or not, it still is allocated within the budget. I talked a little bit about those set-asides, and so those will be the dollars that we would identify as a way to do that. We did add a little bit of staffing into Owyhee High School, and I put this on there because actually it's not very much, but I think it paints a picture of how little increases we actually do. And so in this case, it actually showed an increase because we had a little bit of FTE increase. It's like a vice principal as enrollment increased, right? But for us, those kind of FTE increases are actually big changes in the budget, because essentially what we identify for the most part is we're going to do salary increases, we're going to do our insurance increases. Usually we have a transportation increase, and that's all we pay for. So in this case, when we add FTE, that actually is a big swing in our budget because of just the impact on that. And so I think it's just always something to think about, that we are very cognizant of how we use our dollars and really try to limit as much as possible to maximize the dollars we have for students. We also talked a little about discretionary set aside from that insurance allocation. We have identified some dollars specifically for discretionary set aside, so it's roughly $2 million for across our budget, along with a salary set aside as well. Again, both of those are really just to mitigate risks associated with inflationary pressure, as long as also to manage that. As you can all see, costs are going up. There wasn't dollars allocated specifically from the state for that. So we have some dollars set aside so that if costs continue to increase, or as we offer programs and costs go up, as they have for everybody else, we have some dollars available to be able to meet those needs for students. Special revenue funds. So you guys are going to be experts at this. Next year, I expect you guys will talk to me about special revenue funds and what all of them are. I put it all on one page rather than going through one of the slides. So really you've kind of seen this, we've walked through it, we've talked about the ones that are increasing, we've talked about the ones that are decreasing, we've had some conversation about the ones that are not going to be funded again, and really the impacts of those. I always like to talk about the lottery fund, since that one went up, right? So we'll continue to figure out how we're going to use those dollars. Literacy is another major increase, and that's helping us shift to an all-day kindergarten program. Other than that, we had marginal increases associated with our increases in expectations of enrollment. Here's a little picture of just the breakdown. As you would anticipate, most of our other state funding comes from the lottery and literacy area, along with IT. So we've talked about this a little bit, and it was a question asked over the weekend, so I thought I'd add a slide about, so what are the areas where the general fund kind of has to pick up the difference? So we've had some conversation about, hey, we have this other state funding, and we have some of these programs that we offer and things that we do, but the general fund has to kind of help out. And so what I wanted to do is give you a picture of what that actually looks like. The major areas that you look at are really IT expenditures, and a lot of these are driven off of in 2020, when we had to make some decisions as a state on how we were going to handle reductions in funding. And so a lot of this started with that situation, and we're just still living within those reductions. And so information system staffing, that $451,000 is essentially costs that will shift back to the general fund. I'll usually do that in June 30 when we analyze kind of the financial position and we look at the costs incurred. Counseling is a dollar amount that I've calculated. If I actually hit $29,468.67, that'll be amazing. But in general, that's what my projection is telling me. We'll see. I can give you an update in August on whether I actually got to the penny or not. GT expenditures, that's the actual funding line item. Again, content and curriculum, much the same. So I think what you're going to just see is this kind of gives you a picture of here's the areas where the general fund is going to incur some cost. They're going to be budgeted. We're going to plan for those. And then in addition, I identified a couple down below where we have made adjustments to our operations. So specifically in the IT area, we reduced $1.3 million, and that's money we just don't spend anymore because of the adjustments associated with the funding. Another $700,000 in professional development. Those are not contributions back to the general fund. I don't know if I'm using that term correctly. Contributions back, it's really not expenditures the general fund's going to pick up. Essentially, we have just operated without them. And so our IT director has been able to adjust his budget and figure out how to manage costs to stay within that. And then we've been able to leverage some of the ESSER funding we've received to be able to offset that as well. We've talked a little about title, so I won't walk through that again. Again, a lot of these expenditures, we do have some updates from title. We have received some updates from IDA. I can tell you that we're in the process right now of submitting what is our title application. So once that completes, we'll firm up those numbers. And these are often also those things where we say, oh, we're going to make a budget adjustment. And so it might not be we get $4,026,897. It might be we end up with $4,050,552. And so you would see that next year. You would see a budget adjustment associated with those additional revenues. These will often change during the year. And, I mean, I can tell you we're still getting award letters for funding we received July 1 of this year. And that's not unusual. You know, as people spend or don't spend, it's reallocated out to districts. So you just kind of get used to that process. Much the same with IDA funding. The big change you will notice is really on that stimulus funding line item again. That was one-time dollars, so as we go through and utilize those dollars, they will eventually go away, and then we'll adjust our budget accordingly in our operations. School nutrition. I've realized that I spend so much time looking at their financials, I thought about it all the time, and I necessarily haven't had a whole lot of conversations with you guys about it. So school nutrition is a self-support fund, as you would anticipate. It's funded from USDA and the dollars that we receive from those who pay for meals. Haven't had to pay in recent years. We've been under all lunches were free. Our expectation is that is going to change. So we still have a couple of days where hopefully we'll get different news, but as of right now, we're anticipating that people are going to go back to paid status. Coupled with paid status and the fact that the inflationary pressures are actually extremely high in USDA funding. Specifically, it requires different suppliers. They have to meet different rules and regulations associated with the federal program. And so food costs, I'm sure we have all seen it at the grocery store. They can be substantially higher in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% for certain things that we'll offer. And so that leads to increased costs associated with reductions in revenues. In addition to that, it's not just the increased costs associated with the food, it's actually the availability and the ability to get it. And so that also leads to inflationary pressures associated with even the transportation of getting the food here. So what does all that mean? That means that essentially we anticipate our revenues will go down and our expenses will go up. And so with that, we anticipate our fund balance in that fund is going to continue to reduce. And so we do have a fund balance available to be able to handle some of those. I do think it'll be a conversation we're still going to have as we kind of roll into next year and what that looks like from a financial perspective and how we meet the needs of our kids. Other funds, this might have changed slightly from the presentation I gave you. Essentially the data is the same. I just reorganized it a little bit differently so that you can kind of see here's the revenues coming in. We talk about that beginning fund balance. We talk about the revenues coming in, the other revenues for debt service, total revenues, and then we talk about principal and interest. Again, this is one of those funds that we'll discuss in great detail in August. So right now we plan and project, we look at expenses, we look at our revenues, but again, as we get into August, that L2 form actually is what locks in those tax revenues, and that drives what it is we levy. And so we'll set the budget now, we'll look at some numbers, and then we'll continue to identify market rates. We'll continue to identify what impact that will have on the district's overall levy rate and the dollars we need to meet the debt burden, and then that will adjust. And I do anticipate that actually the levy revenues will probably go down. And so we'll continue to monitor that, and that'll be something we'll have in a discussion about when we approve the L2 form. And then again, these are one of those things that when we go to amend the budget next year, that'll be part of that amendment process. The 2018 bond, we have a couple $1 million left in that. We're finishing up some projects with Owyhee High School, so we anticipate that by the end of this year, all of those funds will be exhausted associated with the construction. We are still, as part of the bond process, looking at ways that we can purchase land, and so that's where dollars often carry over in that fund as we look to identify as their land for future school site purchases that we can do. Plant facilities funding. This walks through essentially the major projects that we look at. Access control is $450,000. That's basically finishing up the schools who don't currently have access control or the badge readers associated with the schools. There's an allocation for IT and athletics. And then the Meridian Middle School cafeteria will be a project we'll continue. I would anticipate, just due to supply chains, you'll actually see this project again next year in the budget, just as we continue to work through the impacts of construction. We are working on doing some bathroom remodels across the district, interior painting jobs, and then school building allocations for equipment, along with some other various ones. ESSER funding breakdown, very similar slide to what you've seen before. This essentially just reverts back to conversation we've had of the goals and how the board was looking to use the ESSER funding. This is essentially encapsulating that and encapsulating those dollars in a 3-year plan, and this is the year of the plan. And then that is a copy of the publication in the paper, which I remember you all ran out to get, right? So you all went looking for the paper. If not, I have a copy of it. It was a really good read. And with that, same process again. Should you approve the budget tonight, then we will move forward with submitting that documentation to the State Department of Education. And with that, I can stand for any questions you have.
All right, any questions?
I have my third.
Trustee Benetti?
So that third question to which I referred, again, just trying to put it into what I'm familiar with. So I'm looking for something that's akin to what would be G&A, or general administrative, right? And you typically want to see that for any organization, definitely below 20% for sure. And ideally, well-run organizations generally have it about 10%, anywhere from 8 to 10%, depending on the industry. Some of these are administration, but I don't know if that directly ties to what I would consider a G&A. So, just to the best of your ability, what would you, if you call G&A things that were not directly applicable to teaching kids, right? So, custodian still supports that, security still supports that, right? Teaching kids. But what about the things that help make that happen, but don't necessarily directly impact the education of children? What would you peg that at from a percentage standpoint, ratio?
So, Chair and Trustees, Dr. Bubb, this is sometimes where the difference between governmental accounting and business accounting sometimes differ. And so there are ways we calculate. I kind of referenced it during the presentation. We talk a little bit about indirect cost rate, which is a rate we request from the State Department attached to our federal grants. And so they have a calculation that we'll go through. I can tell you for this year, our rate is in the neighborhood of, I think it's like 3.75%.
Three and
yeah,
3.25%.
Yeah, so that's the rate, but I don't know that necessarily those two they'll align in exactly the same way. It's a very different calculation for a very different purpose associated with federal rules. And so I think when we want to look at it, because I think those are great metrics for us to look at and things for us to think about, and what I would love is for us to sit down and kind of help define what G&A looks like for a school district, and really try to feel comfortable with, okay, does a principal qualify? Right? And so that's one of the examples I would think of. Well, maybe at an elementary level we say they do, or they don't, because they're direct service to students. But maybe at a secondary level we say, well, maybe that is more G&A. And so I think there's some really good conversations to be had, and then we can help build kind of what that looks like as a metric that we can use, and then we can then take that information and be able to look back and be able to prepare information that kind of says, what does our trend line look like here at West Ada School District? How are we utilizing the dollars the taxpayers are finding them? Are we using them in an effective manner?
Okay, thank you. Well, and can I comment? This is very extremely well put together from what I've seen. So thank you to you, and thank you to Gloria, who I can't see, but behind the column. Thank you, because this is incredibly useful, particularly as a new trustee coming in to understand the district finances. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Trustee Zuna?
Mr. Gillen, I wanted to ask one question on the plant levy slide. But specifically, can you give us some details on what the IT piece of that is, the IT allocation?
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff that make up $3.95 million. So specifically, it's going to be, so a substantial chunk of it, roughly $1.5 million, is what we call projection. So essentially it could be a projector in a room. It could be replacement of that. It could be TVs that we put in a classroom. Many of our classrooms have televisions to help with students being able to see that. It is some cameras. We've allocated $100,000 for that. It is video storage. It is replacement of old paging systems. So really a lot of IT infrastructure. We will replace routers. We will adjust with the WAN, so within a building. So essentially the wireless access points that you see. I'm looking for one right now, and of course I'm not going to find it. But they're in the buildings. Yeah, see, everybody's looking now. Oh, right there. So there you go. Over there in the corner, those will be things that we'll go through and try to replace. So really it's an allocation for us to repair more of the infrastructure, the things that you don't see that make the information technology system operate and allow us to provide those services. So we'll also do switch refreshers. We have planned to do some battery backups associated with the NOC, which is essentially the IT server room, so that we can make sure that those things will work effectively. And if we had a power outage, we have enough time to be able to secure the servers and be able to have it shut down accordingly and not negatively impact the technology that we have.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, one follow-up question. When I was looking through these, I was trying to understand how a couple of them fit into plant facilities, and so I definitely understand that. What about the athletic allocation?
Yeah, absolutely. So athletic allocation, that's a couple of different components. So 2 of them are actually replacements of tennis courts. So we're going to replace tennis courts at Rocky Mountain and Eagle High, and we'll go to post-tension concrete. And so that'll be an investment. The switch of that will actually reduce our maintenance costs going forward, and also, just quite frankly, the work that we have to do on those tennis courts. So we're really excited to be able to make those changes. We have some gym floor refinishing at Mountain View High School. And then we have done an allocation for athletic facilities. It's $150,000, so it's not as much as we wish we could do, but at this point it's a start. And so what we'll be doing with some of those is our athletic director, Jason Moore, will have some dollars available, and he's going to look to replace weight equipment across the district. So he'll be doing a review of athletic facilities across the district, identifying some needs, and then has some dollars allocated to be able to meet those needs for students.
Thank you. I think that's great. As you look across our district, there are so many buildings that are in areas that are in need, and so I'm always really interested in where we steer the plant facility money. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I do have one. Galileo Turf. Can you talk a little bit to what the need is there and why that's a good use of our funds?
Absolutely. So actually, if I can, I would like to have our Director of Facilities, Spencer McLean, come up. And he'll kind of talk a little bit about the need, again, at Galileo, some of the problems we see with the facility there, and specifically the land and the grass, and the work that we've done in the past to try to get it up to where we want the district to be and the facility to be, and now how we think that implementing the turf will work from here.
Madam Chair, trustees, yeah, Galileo's been a struggle for the district since the day it was built. We have had a challenge trying to keep that grass. So we've had mud, we've had packed dirt, concrete, also referred to. So over the last 20, 25 years since Galileo came into the district's inventory, we've struggled with trying to provide a surface that's playable, that the community can use and the students. We've gone to our designers and engineers and said, hey, what's the best opportunity or what's the best option for us going forward? Their recommendation was turf, and we chose, due to the expense then, to not do that. And so we, in 2018, completely tore up the entire field, redid the irrigation, put in water windows to try to facilitate drainage. It didn't work. And so we ended up again with the same product that we had from the very beginning. So we went back to the drawing board again and asked the engineers and the designers again, you know, what's our best option? And they came back and said, you know, it's turf. So that's the project that you see on the budget today. Madam Chair, you know, with your question asked, is there any other options that we can possibly come up with? We went back to the designers again last week and referenced it. This is a lot of money, and we take it serious. You know, this is what we do. So, short of removing the sod down the center of that field every year and replacing it with more sod, which is not a guarantee that it will be a playable surface, that's about the only option we got outside of turf, and that's going to be expensive. I also asked what their thoughts are on waiting an additional year to see if the price would rebid it, if the price would come down. Right now, currently, non-residential projects are increasing at 7.2%. So the opinion of the design team is that we're going to be looking at about $100,000 to $120,000 more next year to do the same project if we were to wait. So ultimately, from a facility standpoint, we have exhausted all options. We've gone to our design team and our engineers, the people that are, you know, this is their profession, this is what they do, and we've gone against their recommendation twice, and here we are again. So that's kind of the full story as to how we've gotten where we're at on Galileo.
And it's my understanding that water table under that is just a few inches.
Yeah, I mean,
below.
Yeah, the water table down at Eagle, for those of you that live in Eagle, It's not very far down. So when we do get the rains and then you allow students to go across that surface, it just pumps it. The water comes up and it becomes a mud pit again. And there's only one field. It's a very small piece of land. It's one of the smallest fields that we have for that enrollment. It is a unique site, you know, so it's not like many of the other sites that we have in our inventory.
And when you say turf, should I be envisioning like football field? What's that going to look like?
No, it is not. No, it is not. It's just a green. It will look like grass. It's just a green surface. There's no lines. It is not built to the same specs or standards that our football fields are. The lifespan is going to be 15 to 20 years if maintained. And from a budget standpoint, this will save us funds in the long run. We'll maintain it. We'll continue to service it just like we do our football fields, but it doesn't have the same standards that our football fields do. So it doesn't have rubber infill. It's a sand infill. But it'll be a safe playing surface for that community to use on that side of our district. And right now, it's just not safe.
All right, thank you. That answers my questions. Any others? All right. Okay, and any other comments or questions? All right, Mr. Yellen, thank you. That was a lot. We really appreciate all of the work that you go to kind of dummy that down for those of us, maybe I'll just speak for myself, that need it done that way. And it's just a lot that you're doing. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, where are we? Okay, now we move to our patron input. Pardon me? Oh, we need to close it? Pardon me. I think we're right here, sweetie. Yes? I think we're on patron input, yes?
Correct.
Yes, okay. No, you're totally fine. I appreciate you helping me. Okay, at this point, we'll move to patron input. We do have some folks signed up, and just remind everybody a couple of things. First of all, as board members, we're unable to comment on that, so if we seem like we're not responding, it's not because we don't want to. And then we also ask that you just limit your comments to things that are agendized. So with that, we will ask that student Emily Smith come up. No, you're fine. Welcome.
Thank you. Chairwoman Frazier, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Bubb, thank you for hearing us today. I'm Emily Smith, a senior at Meridian High School, and I'm here to speak to you about the proposed changes to high school bell schedules across the district, with the addition of the potential intervention period. Intervention is not a feasible solution to the problem our district is facing academically. This advisory will take valued instruction time from our students and educators. By the end of the 2022-2023 school year, the intervention will take about 6 days of learning from individual classes. As a student that takes AP and honors classes, it concerns me. In AP classes, we already struggle to finish curriculum before test days approach in the spring. This will further set back our exam preparedness. Presently, teachers across the district are available to give students extra help when needed between 7:15 and 7:35 before school. After an 85-minute period, it is less than likely that the additional 25 minutes will be used academically by students, especially before lunch. This possible intervention has also attributed to the transportation issue for RHS and IFA, including other CTE schools like Meridian and Oahe. I understand that we face an academic problem that is said to be fixed with intervention, but as students, I think it is time to take ownership for our learning. In high school, we know of the resources available to us and how to use them. We don't need a scheduled time for monitored extra help. We need administrators and educators at a district and school levels to hold us accountable. High school prepares us for the real world where there is no intervention. Please face this head on rather than cater to the problem by not implementing intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have Nathan Wall come up. Welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Bubb, my name is Nathan Wall, and I'm the ASB President at Meridian High School, and will be a senior this year. I wish to speak about the intervention for the 2022-2023 school year. I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Myers and the team that has worked on developing intervention. I appreciate the time that you have put into trying to find a solution to this problem that many high schools in the district are facing. My main concern about intervention is that it will pull 5 minutes of instructional time from each class period. I'm a student that takes college and AP level courses, and I can attest to the fact that we use every last minute to get through all of the material. Even allowing students to get out of an intervention after first quarter and giving them a longer lunch is not what we want. We want the most time in the classroom as possible, and while losing 5 minutes a day, every day doesn't sound like much, it adds up over the course of the year. Throughout my time in high school, I have seen standards within the district drop. Examples of this include the no late work policy and unlimited retakes. The effects of this have been devastating, and while the idea came from a good place, all it has done is make classes easier and allow for students to just glide through and not turn their work in until the last minute. Unfortunately, this has even trickled down to graduation. Every year there are students who should not walk, yet they do because their teachers bump their grades up at the end of the year. Is this preparing our students for their futures? When are the students going to come before the graduation rate? The students have seen it, but so have the teachers. This has become a problem within our district. We need to let the students fail so they can learn and be ready for life after high school. We can't keep dropping the standards to the lowest achiever and hold everyone else back. At the end of the day, not everyone needs intervention, and to take away learning time from students for something they don't need is only hurting their futures. The solution to help struggling students isn't to make all the students go to intervention. Students rise to expectations that are set for them, but they also fall to low ones. I ask that as you make your decision tonight to really think about the negative effects of intervention and how it will hurt high school or high achieving students and struggling students alike. Students that are struggling need to be given help and focused on individually and not put in a classroom with other students who don't need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Colin Larkin. Welcome.
Chairman Fraser, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Bubb, I would also like to echo the opinions of my fellow classmates on the concern of adding an intervention to our class schedule. As a fellow AP student and honor student, I understand and realize the effects of taking 5 minutes off of each class, and which we calculated to be about 7 class periods, which is quite detrimental to our curriculum, noting that our AP tests typically happen in the first week of May, and that would give us about 1 week less per class to prepare for the test. So we'd be looking at testing like equivalent in like late March, and also in some of my other classes, I've known that we've been going up and past the bell and trying to learn the material, and so just having to push back and break up each individual sections would also make it harder for the learning. And also we don't even have to just look on Wednesdays with the shorter class period. It's felt on that you can't quite get as much through, and so I just shortening every class periods would, in my opinion, not be the right answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Beth Franks. Welcome.
Hello. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman, the trustees, and Dr. Bubb. My name is Beth Franks. I am a parent of a Renaissance High School class of 22 and 24. For those of you who were at the Renaissance commencement last week, you heard my son speak. Without district transport and the changes that have been proposed for transport, my sons would not have the opportunity to attend Renaissance. We live more than 6 miles from our boundary school, so transport home from the boundary is really important for us. As you solve for the transportation challenges the district is facing, I would urge you, don't leave transport from the boundary to families. We can take responsibility for our children's transport, but it would have the unintended consequence, I believe, of limiting the access of a Renaissance education to students who can self-transport. Renaissance families choose this for our students. We choose it for the academic rigor. We choose it for the character of the schools. It's a gem in your district. This is an excellent school you have. Don't limit it. Please don't limit it. They've been running on an adjusted bell schedule. I can solve, as a working parent, I can solve for a handful of days where I have to provide transport. I can coordinate with other parents. I can request limited adjustment to my work schedule, But if I have to do that every day, you've eliminated an option for my sons. I strongly encourage you to continue working with Dr. Hawkins and her team and the team at IFAA to find a solution for your transportation issues that don't leave students at boundary schools, that provide them a way to take advantage even if they don't live near the core of the district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. David Ballard. And welcome.
Greetings, board. My name is David Ballard, and I'm a Renaissance High School student going into senior year. I come before you today to testify on behalf of the RHS student body in opposition to the proposed changes to the structure of our bell schedules. The proposed change is something that we, the students, have not asked for, that we don't want, and that has seen unanimous testimony in its opposition from students thus far. Foremost among our concerns is the fact that the proposed change would make ours and IFA's bell schedules identical to the rest of the school district. Because we are a public magnet school, this is fundamentally troublesome. Every student in RHS's bounds should have the fundamental right to be bused to school if they are not within walking distance of their boundary school. The proposed change makes this impossible, as shuttles would depart from boundary schools before the regular buses to those schools arrive. In the discourse surrounding the proposed policy change, we've heard a lot of buzzwords such as seat time and intervention. Don't be fooled. Renaissance is unique. We already have an existing system for after-school intervention that works. And because of the rigor of our education and our homework workload, seat time is not a measure of, it's not a metric that measures our learning. It is wrong to change the structure of our school day such that things like busing and participation and extracurricular activities such as sports become incredibly difficult to impossible without first coming to us students to see if this is something that we actually want or need. So please do not change the structure of our bell schedule. Retain the model that already exists and has worked just fine for the past several years. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last scheduled speaker is Ruben Benavides. Welcome.
Thank you. Got to take off the glasses, sorry. So Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Bubb, thank you for the opportunity to address you all this evening. I'm a parent of a current Renaissance High School student and have 2 graduates of Renaissance High School. My input today is in regards to the proposed transportation and bell schedule changes. What I'd like to say is that Renaissance High School students are very responsible, they're independent, and they are driven students. They're very self-motivated and police themselves very well. I have seen this firsthand as a parent volunteer during academic learning hours and extracurricular activities. I would hope that all the students who are accepted, current and future, to Renaissance High School can continue to attend and thrive with these proposed changes. Many of the students rely on the bus and shuttle to attend Renaissance High School. Many may not have a personal vehicle or a parent that can get them to and from school. Renaissance High School students are also involved with sports, clubs, extracurricular activities at their home assigned schools. And with this bell schedule changes, many may not be able to have this opportunity to continue to do so. Please consider these changes carefully and take the time to really consider the impact on our Renaissance High School students, instructors, and staff. Taking or adding a minute here and there may not seem noticeable, but the impact is felt. Taking a shuttle away will also have the same effect. So please continue to give Dr. Hawkins and her team the ability to continue to give direction, and please take their advice on how the school operates as its schedules that are in place and academics do work. I have complete trust in the team and their abilities to continue to put our school in the right directions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we do still have some time if there's anyone that would like to speak and didn't get a chance to sign up. All right, to all of you that came tonight, thank you so much, and especially our students. It's wonderful to see you taking part in your own education. That's really inspiring. Thank you for coming. All right, and with that, I will entertain a motion to close our budget hearing. Trustee Redford.
Motion to close the delightfully informative budget hearing.
Do I have a second? Vice Chair Azuna.
Second, thank you.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. We'll now move forward with any motions, if anyone feels inclined, to approve the 21-22 amended budget as presented. Trustee Benetti.
I move to approve the amended 2021-22 budget as presented.
Do I have a second? Trustee Redford.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the 22-23 proposed budget as presented. Trustee Benetti.
I move to approve the fiscal year 2022-23 proposed budget as presented.
Do I have a second? Trustee Redford.
Second.
Excellent. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. And I already closed the budget hearing. Did I do that wrong? Okay. All right. Is there any discussion? All right. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the 22-23 bell schedule. I'll now have a presentation. What? Okay, sorry. Help me. Go to the agenda. Okay, that's what happens when you give Lori too many pieces of paper. Okay, psych. We're going to have a discussion now. We'll have our Ada County Assessor, Mr. McQuaid, come up and offer that presentation.
Chair and trustees, I just wanted to take a moment and share a little about, tell you a little about what's going to happen next. Mr. McQuaid is going to come speak. Specifically, what we're going to hear a little bit about tonight is we're going to hear about market values. We're going to hear a little about the construction that's going on here across our district. To give you some context, this is all part of that information we're going to use when we start prepping our L2 forms in August. So it's awesome that we get this update now because we can start thinking about how that's going to impact the district as we look for that. And thank you, Mr. McQuaid, for coming and sharing with us.
Jonathan, thanks for that excellent introduction. I really appreciate that. This is my last presentation for this year. This is my 14th one that I've gone to my assessment briefing. And not only is it my last one for this year, but this will be my last one because this is, I'm not running again. So I don't know whether my predecessor is going to continue this or not, but we'll just see what happens. I'm going to leave that up to them. This presentation is going to be a little bit different than what I typically talk about. I spend more time on the numbers, the assessed values, and changes. I really want to hit something hard towards the last of the presentation. I'm going to spend about 3 or 4 minutes on that. I'm going to set my watch right now because I don't want to go over 10 minutes altogether. There's been a lot of talk lately about increased assessments, and I just want to get a couple of things straight. And so at the end, we'll go over that.
You can advance your slides there, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. We've sent out 112,000 assessment notices to property owners here in West Ada School District. We had about 218,000 assessment notices altogether were mailed out, and 212,000 for the district here. Before I get into that, I just into more of the detail and numbers, I want to make it clear that what is the role of the assessor in the property tax system? It's not to collect taxes. If I had $1 for everyone who's called me the tax collector, I could have retired years ago. But no, the assessor, the purpose, what the assessor does, it allocates the taxes. The districts will create their budgets, and then the assessor, through our assessments, decides how much each individual property owner is going to pay of that total bill. And that's really important, and we'll go over that in just a little more detail in a minute here. There's not a one-to-one correspondence in increase in assessed values and property taxes. A lot of people make that a mistake. Assessments are at 30% this year in Ada County. And a lot of people are just panicked that their taxes are going to go up 30%. I just seen the preliminary levies for all of the different taxing units here in Ada County, and there are about over 40 of those. Those levies are going down anywhere from 15% to one, I think, is almost down 40% the levy is. So but the increased values do is tend to push the levy down. Okay, how close? I was talking to someone on the phone the other day, and they said, oh, well, we're not talking about what a property would sell for, we're talking about assessed values. Well, no, assessed values and sales values should be exactly the same. And the State Tax Commission, they measure how well we're doing on that by what is called a ratio study. As you can see here, that our ratio, they'll take all of the sales that occurred in Ada County last year. We had about 13,000 sales. They will take those sales, compare our assessed values to those, and come up with a ratio. You can see in 2021, residential improved was about 94%, commercial improved is 97%. That's anomalous. Typically, the residential is a little bit higher than commercial, but you see in 2020, to me, in one sense, it's the ideal solution. That is where they're both the same. They're both at 94. I'd like to see them a little bit higher, but they're both the same. That's called the level of assessment, and we're going to come back to that. That's a really important concept. Just to get into the numbers a little bit, total market value in West Ada schools about $63 billion. That's not what taxable value would be, and I do not understand school funding at all. I know how the cities do their budgets, the counties do the budgets, other tax authorities, but when the school, Nancy Lando at Boyce School has spent many hours trying to instruct me on this, and I'll tell you, I still don't understand it. So this is going to be in terms of how I see it for like the county or the city. I'm sure your budget officer will be able to put this into the context of your needs. But total market value is at $62 billion. We take out the homestead exemption. That's certainly important. That's $8.7 billion. Other exemptions, $57 million. We have all of the exemptions that have been approved by the commissioners as of April 15th. There might be a few left out, totaling about $57 million. To be on the safe side, we will take those out. We're working towards the potential taxable value. And then I have operating property. Operating property is property owned by the utilities. If it's AT&T, it would be line miles of wire. If it's Union Pacific Railroad, it's the number of miles of track in any particular area. But they add that in, they being the tax commission, they do that because they do a unit valuation completely different than the way the assessors do it. They value the entire company and then allocate a certain portion to the state of Idaho, and then they further break that down into counties and different taxing units. We'll get that information probably in towards the end of August, and we would add that back in. So we're looking at potential taxable value is about $54 billion for this year. Breaking this down just a little bit, we have the residential valuations. That's they're $54 billion. That's up 38% compared to 2021, and median assessed value change is 32%. The median in Ada County is 30%. What's driving this? It's really simple. It's supply and demand. We've got people who are moving in. We have people wanting to build new houses, move up from smaller houses, and the demand has just been absolutely amazing. And again, this is for, as of January 1st of this year, and we know that the market is softening. What do I mean softening? I believe it was as of March, we had seen single-family residential property increase by about 20%, and this is according to MLS. 20% sounds like a lot, but last year, at the same time for the first quarter with MLS, it was about 30 or 35%. So it's slowing down, but it's still 20% is a very fast pace for real estate, especially historically it's been about 5%. I'm gonna have to really pick up the speed here. Commercial property is, real property is 8.3 billion. That's up about 30%. Business personal property, that's minus 1%. They're phasing out. Personal property is just gradually going away. They had, probably 5 or 6 years ago, they gave an exemption of all commercial personal property. First $100,000 was exempt. And this year, they now have exempting up to $250,000. I believe the intent of the legislature is to eventually take out business personal property, just make it exempt altogether. I know there's a lot of pressure for that, and I think that's the direction that they're heading in. And I will say that the $250,000, the state reimburses the counties and the cities for that lost value. New construction roll is important to the cities and the counties because we get to increase our budgets by the new construction roll. It's the new construction roll times 80% of new 90% of new construction roll times last year's levy, and we can increase budget capacity by that about. So that's why it's important to us. I don't know if it's important to you. It just might be kind of a bellwether though. So residential, 1.1 billion, that's up 50.5%. Commercial, up 60%. And this is all for West Ada School. And new subdivisions, change of status, that's 325 million, up 238%. And that is going, this will be the last year new subdivisions and changes in use will be added into the new construction roll. So that in essence is going to be gone. Total increase, 2 billion, 43%. Urban renewal, one that really sticks out, the Union urban renewal, that's up 5 million%, but that's 5 million increase from the $100 the year before. So that is nothing to really panic about. This is what I want to just kind of start to end up here is the tax burden. There's a lot of confusion. The last several years, tax burden's really been talked about a lot, local government as well as over at the State House. As we look here, tax burden. Tax burden is who pays the property taxes, residential or commercial. And if you look at the tax burden for 2020, residential paid 79%, commercial paid 21%. Historically, a 0.5%, a full percent change, that's pretty typical. A 1% change is quite a bit. But we're looking here now at 2021, an 81% change. Residential is paying 81%, commercial is paying 19%. That's a big change. That's 2 percentage points. So that's tax burden. Who's paying the taxes? We started out by saying that in 2021, residential, their assessment level was 94%, and commercial was 97%. That's the assessment. And I want to point this out, that I have control over the assessment level. I don't have any control over the tax burden at all. And again, there's a lot of anxiety about this. It's being said that residential, because of the increase in values, and because of the assessment methods that we use, that commercial is really not paying their fair share. And I really disagree with that completely, and I just wanted to mention why. Here in West Ada, you have we said 105,000 residential parcels here. You have 4,000 commercial parcels. In other words, you have 24 times the number of residential parcels as you do commercial parcels. So that alone is going to tell you who's going to be paying a larger piece. Residential is $54 billion in market value. Commercial is $8.3 billion. So you have 6.5 times the value of commercial than you do residential. And as, of course, assessments go up, that's going to be changing as people move in, more houses. That's going to continue to go up. And I just want to, the increase on residential is 15 billion, 8 times the increase of the 1.9 billion of commercial. So that's the reason why we're looking at this change. It's it doesn't sound right, and it doesn't look right, but when you understand it, there are some reasons why it is, there's that growing tax burden. The legislature is concerned about this. Other taxing authorities are concerned about it, but I think before we do anything, we just need to understand that it's just not that the assessor is not doing a very good job of assessing the properties. Again, I have no control over the tax burden at all. That is all buyer and seller driven. How much is someone going to pay for a house? Who wants to build a new house? Who's going to build a new commercial building? I have no control over that. But the level, are we going to assess it at 94%, 95%, 97%? That's something that we can do in my office. And with that, I am finished. And I would be happy to see if I can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. That was great. Are there any comments or questions?
I have a comment.
Trustee Benetti.
So I had the opportunity to speak with some people in your office to help educate myself about the, how that impacts levy and school bond funding, different issues.
Yes.
And your office was incredibly helpful. They took a lot of time nursemaiding me. I went to the wrong place, as it turns out, as you just mentioned. But they were very kind. They're very thoughtful. And they told me that you, when did you first start? Were you first elected?
I took office, I was elected in 1994 and took office in 1995. So this is my 28th year.
Wow. Thank you for all of that service. Enjoy your retirement.
Yeah, I love my job so much. It's, I kind of look at it like a sports star or an actor or something. It's, people say, oh, good job, thank you. But I was just doing what I loved to do. And it's nice that people have appreciated it. But I just did it just a pure love of serving the public and trying to be fair and coming out and addressing those of you who are in leadership positions.
Well, thank you for lending us into your knowledge and your experience. Thank you for all those years. And again, your office was just exceptionally helpful to me personally. So thank you. Well done.
I will report that back. I was ready to kind of duck and run for a minute, but I can walk out with holding my head high.
Thank you. Any other comments? Vice Chair Zuna.
Thank you. Can you go back to the slide with the residential and commercial and the tax burden?
Oh, yes, of course.
Thank you. Do you happen to know how that compares to what Boise School District looks like?
Do I have it broken down by the school district?
Yeah, do you happen to know? Because I think they're higher on the commercial, quite a bit higher on the commercial side than West Ada, right? Because this is West Ada specific.
Yes. No, this is Ada County.
Oh, this is Ada County.
Right. We don't
Okay.
have it broken down specific by that, by different taxing authorities.
Okay, never mind my question then. Thank you.
Ooh, I dodged that one. Great.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Mr. McQuaid, thank you so much.
You know, when I finish this every year, to me, it's just like school's out for summer. And it's, so I know how these kids feel when the last day of school comes through. So, well, thank you for your patience and your understanding. And if you don't mind, if I get homesick, maybe I might come back next year and just say hello or something like that.
Anytime.
Okay, thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. All right, next, because it would make more sense to hear about the bell schedule before we make a motion on it, Mr. Myers, our Chief Academic Officer, will come enlighten us.
All right, good evening. Chair Frazier, trustees, and Dr. Bubb. Tonight before you is the third presentation of the draft bell schedule for next school year. There were no changes to the bell schedule other than the additional information in terms of what happens on late start collaboration. As a review for you and for our community, late start collaboration is defined as teams of teachers, administrators, and staff across West Ada at the same time, where we guarantee that as those teams work together to identify what we want students to learn, how we know they've learned it, and how we're going to respond collectively as a group and through teams. That evidence-based process takes place every Wednesday and then throughout the school year during guaranteed timeframes. That's what happens on late start, and that's why it's so critically important during that additional 15 minutes where schedules are pushed back during that time frame to secure that time frame. I do want to note that during that Wednesday time frame, you'll notice that the additional instructional block found in the high school bell schedule of 25 minutes isn't on that Wednesday time frame, and that allows us to recoup some of that instructional time by starting 15 minutes later that way. That is common across the board as you move through each of the levels that way. Essentially, the schedule is bumped by 15 minutes across the board at each one of those bell schedule settings. I also want to take a moment to address some commonly asked questions through patron and community feedback that I've received, and I know collectively we've received as a team. And I thought that by doing that, it might also address some of the questions and concerns raised this evening because they are common. The first thing I'd like to do is thank our students. Your advocacy for instruction, time of instruction, and your dedication to learning is absolutely admirable. And when we speak to what we want students to leave with when they leave West Ada and go out to the community, go out to career or college readiness, that is exactly what we're talking about. Your leadership and your input is valued and appreciated, and I want you to know that no matter what the decision is as you move forward this evening, that the fact that you took your time out of your schedule to be here and stand before this crowd and convey a message about your feelings and your opportunity for your peers is absolutely what we want to see, so thank you. So to address some of those common concerns, just some quick statements around some components. The first is around the intervention and enrichment opportunity that the 25-minute time frame builds. So the 25-minute time frame built into the schedule is about both intervention and enrichment. And I want to talk just specifically about those two terms so that we have some common definitions. Intervention really is the support when needed, okay? And that support when needed is defined as if a student isn't learning those guaranteed and essential standards where we're saying this student has to learn these in order to be successful at the next grade level, we're going to dedicate intervention time for that. It is outside of what we call core instructional time, which if you think in a high school lens is that really that core 86-minute time period. When you think, though, that takes place both at middle school and at elementary, we say there's time dedicated to core instruction. These are grade level standards-based instruction. Intervention is everything that happens in addition to that. But there's another lens to intervention, which is enrichment, which is if students, when we ask the question, have students learned those essential standards? And if they have, what are we going to do to enrich and extend that opportunity? An example we heard tonight were AP classes and honors classes, but even within those courses themselves, there's opportunities for support and help when students need it, and opportunities for enrichment. And so we want to make sure that the message around that 25-minute time period is not just about the students who need the help to meet those standards, it's about the students who have met those standards and what additional opportunities can we provide. It also creates structures within a school setting that we can guarantee some of the events that happen at high school and in school in general, we can dedicate time to. And some of those times take away from instructional time periods. So when you think through things like, well, what about opportunities to sit down and talk about career and college readiness, or to have conversations around what it means to fill out a FAFSA, or what it means to create a college application or a career application, or present to students CTE opportunities and say, here's 25 minutes dedicated to that, where right now some of those opportunities come from instructional time through things like assembly schedules or creative schedules that happen one-off within the school year. And so although we don't mean to pull from that instructional time, those things happen just due to day-to-day circumstances that take place within the school setting. A really great conversation I had with a group of students who had called concerned about when their student council timeframe was going to take place, because now it's common across the board, was we could schedule it within that 25-minute time period and you wouldn't have to take it out of an instructional time schedule, or you wouldn't have to give up some of your lunch time frame or extend your lunch time frame to do that. And those are just some examples. So currently, we do have intervention and enrichment opportunities at our high schools, including Renaissance High School and IFA. But I want to make note that most of these, the vast majority of these, are by invitation and only if students are able to self-transport before and after school. And although the intent is there, the same goal is there to provide students an intent, the opportunity for all students to receive that intervention, just by its nature, if they're not able to self-transport, doesn't provide that essential question, which is this: what are we going to do when students aren't learning the essential content and standards that are there, if we can't answer that question for all students in West Ada, for every student in West Ada, because they're here with us during that bell schedule, we truly cannot respond to that statement that says, in West Ada, we support all students regardless, that we ensure success for all students regardless. Because if we can't answer that question for just one student, we can't answer it for all. But I want you to know that this isn't about one student. There are many. Not getting something right the first time is part of the learning process. And it's not always about a student's willingness to engage or their attendance or them not being there. Sometimes it is by no fault of their own, and sometimes it is fault of their own. What did I do here? Okay, we'll just leave that there. And so, but that learning portion of that, not knowing it right the first time, is part of the learning process. And so imagine, if you will, by changing bell schedule, by changing the conversation, a building culture that states collectively this: both students and staff, everybody there, we're willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that myself and my peers are successful. That I'm willing to give up just a little bit of time within this time frame because it allows me to get opportunities for enrichment and allows for my peers to get the help that they need. Because there's going to be a point, no matter what courses I'm in, whether they're advanced or honors courses, I'm going to need help. Something's going to happen because that's part of the learning process. And if that time's dedicated, I know it's there. And I know that collectively together as a team and as a school, we're going to address that together. And so that together we learn and we celebrate through a common earned privilege, and nobody is left out in that structure and that model. It is true that the daily change to the schedule is 5 minutes less per period, and this is true. Thus, we're going to use every minute wisely in all classrooms. And this does happen now across West Ada, and it's defined as bell-to-bell instruction, which means that when that bell rings, we're ready to learn, and we are continued to be ready to learn and engaged until that bell rings again. And we're going to do that up until through the last 5 minutes of instruction to ensure that we use every moment wisely. As proposed, the bell schedule, along with our calendar, far exceed the required minimum number of minutes required by the state of Idaho. So what I'm saying is that in the state of Idaho, we meet it with or without those additional 5 minutes. But in West Ada, we don't do the bare minimum. We're not going to do that. And so we're going to take the extra time. And again, it's still, even at 86 minutes, we are above the minimum instructional minutes. We're going to take that extra time and use it wisely by identifying intentional times for support, both for intervention and enrichment, as I just discussed. In most classrooms, this time often happens during core instructional periods, as it should. There should be time for teachers to work with small groups or one-on-one with students, but that time is limited. And we know that that time is limited. And so to increase an opportunity for a teacher to say, you know what? We've reached that time frame. Come and meet with me for an extra 25 minutes during this time period so I can help support you in this learning. And conversely, for a student to be able to say, can I come to you and get some additional support and help? We have a structure set up in order to be able to allow that to happen. Oh, that's me doing that. My apologies. All right. The additional time in the schedule also creates structured opportunities for reteaching and assessment. A structure for this process will help to ensure that when a retake for an assessment is provided, the structure for reteaching and support is provided as well. Assessment is part of the learning process. Assessment is part of saying, I'm now going to show you what I've learned. When we step outside in a career and college situations, the vast majority of assessments we take as adults can be retaken. And by doing that, what we're saying is, I've learned as much as I could, I'm going to show what I know, and if I mess something up or I need to do it again, I'm going to learn some more and then reassess. This is common practice in the world. It truly is. And so the idea of this one-time assessment isn't always best. Sometimes it is, but not always. Through this structure, it allows for an opportunity for a teacher or a student to say, I'd like to show my learning better. Can I come to you during a few 25-minute periods or two 25-minute periods and show my learning better? Can I come to you and relearn some of this information and show my learning better? Again, that does take place in West Ada classrooms across West Ada. It just happens individually by department or by classroom. This creates a structure whereby teachers and students know that time is dedicated to get that job done as part of the learning process, not as an additional invitation to it. And then lastly, the Bell schedule does align both IFA and Renaissance schedules with other high schools. This is true. Data was collected on numbers of students that would be impacted by athletics and activities in home high schools. And I want to be transparent with that. It's this year's data on student athletics and additional opportunities outside of the schools. at their home high schools. So although this number of students is minimal, and most practices begin between 3:10 and 3:15, which does allow for 30 to 35 minutes of transportation time after school at our furthest site, which would be Eagle High School, we do want to address the needs of all students. So whether it's a minimum number of students or one student, remember we just said this with intervention, we need to have the same conversation around athletics and outside opportunities. Jason Warr, our district athletic director, has already started the work collaboratively with myself and the academic leadership team and athletic directors at the buildings and coaches to adjust practice times or be very flexible with time for students and to set up time frames that are going to help most students be successful, and then to work individually with students to ensure that that time is dedicated for them. But again, this isn't impacted across all athletics. It depends upon what season that is and the number of players involved, and then it really is impacted by our furthest location in travel time, which would be Eagle High School. But again, Mr. Warr is working directly with those coaches and ADs to provide that opportunity regardless for all students to ensure that it's equitable. And so thank you for just a little bit of time for that summary behind the Bell schedule. I hope it addresses some of the common concerns and questions with that. I do want you to know this, none of this is happening by accident without very intentional planning on behalf of the building administration, the teaching teams, and district administration to make sure that what we say with this, the intent of this Bell schedule is going to give us is exactly what happens. So, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Vice Chair Zuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your work on this. I truly appreciate it. I also want to thank Dr. Hawkins and Mr. Hausel for the feedback that they have provided, because I know that their schools are really impacted by this. I think I know the answer to this already, but I'm just going to ask for your commitment that as we enter into next year and we roll this out and we look at what this looks like, that you will be really specific at identifying if it works for our students, if it works for our staff, our AP teachers, what's the impact to them, and then report that back to the board so that we really can see that it's given us the positive improvements that we expect it to.
Madam Chair and Trustee, that is something we will absolutely do as we measure impact of this process in West Ada.
Thank you. Can I make one other comment? Really appreciate the students that were out here to speak tonight, and it's really hard when we make decisions where people feel really different when they're on different sides of the issues. And tonight I heard from some students that are really concerned about losing classroom instruction in their AP classes. We heard from another student that isn't worried about the classroom time because they're already really successful. And I think we end up in these situations where it's not one size doesn't fit for everybody, and we have to make the best decision that we can make for all kids, and that's really difficult. We don't take those decisions lightly, but we do have to kind of make the best decision we can, and we have fantastic administrative staff that will make sure that they're looking at that to make sure that things are working the way that they expect it to. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Mr. Myers, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Gillen, you're up again. Our Chief Operations Officer is going to give us some information on Renaissance and Idaho Fine Arts Academy transportation changes for 22-23.
Chair and Trustees, Dr. Bubb, I wanted to take a couple minutes and talk a little bit about the transportation setup with Renaissance and IFA, kind of walk through what that's going to look like for next year, hopefully kind of answer some of the questions that have been brought out from the testimony today, and we can kind of walk through that process. So some of the challenges, the driver of this discussion is obviously Bell schedule. Mr. Myers did a great job presenting that, so I'm not really going to spend a whole lot of time in that. But I did want to just talk about the current shuttle system we have and kind of how it operates normally, at least this year. So essentially, we have to look at the shuttles that are headed towards Renaissance and IFA and work backwards to make sure that those shuttles can meet the certain timelines and get to the school on time. So we essentially work backwards, and that drives when it is that students need to get on the bus, when they need to get to their home high school, when they need to pick up that shuttle, and when they need to make their way to Renaissance and IFA. That's in the morning. In the afternoon, we essentially turn that system around. And so now those shuttles are leaving Renaissance and IFA, and they're trying to make their way to the home high schools. And this is often where we start to see some of the breakdowns with the shuttle system and impact it can have across our district. So let's say we have a shuttle that is headed to, we've heard about Eagle High School being the furthest away, so we'll use them as the example. We have a shuttle. The students that are on this are going to be dispersed across all of the Eagle High buses. So we have Eagle High School, the buses are there, they're waiting for the shuttle, and let's say that that shuttle has a problem that we've just all experienced every day now in the Valley, traffic. And so now the shuttle is expected to be there by X, but it's 15 minutes late. All the buses at Eagle High essentially are sitting. They're waiting for those students to come off the shuttle so that they can be dispersed onto the bus routes, and then the buses can drive them home. What that does create for us is essentially a timing delay and a cascade effect. And so now that timing delay with that bus system means those high school students are a few minutes late. And so that I think could be, manageable. But then when we talk through, well, that means that those same buses are now going to be late for Eagle Middle School. And maybe there's some delays or just timing and traffic and that. And now those same buses that are leaving Eagle Middle School when they run their routes, we'll use the example of now they're going to go to Eagle Elementary. And that's often where we can see the cascade effect, the delays that start happening associated with our transportation system. And that's why I've even had the conversation. I've had a parent call me and say, my child, my elementary student hasn't even left school yet. So the day hasn't even ended. And I just got a blackboard that the bus is late. How is that possible? You haven't even left yet. Well, the reason why we know that is because we know that high school bus is late, and we know that that middle school bus is probably going to be late. The driver's going to do their best to be as efficient as possible and try to make up time, but it's probably, we just know the travel, and we know the traffic, and so we know that's not going to happen, and so we can already see the impact it's going to have on that elementary student. So how do we fix it? All right, how do we basically pull the shuttle system essentially out of our system and be able to run it separately so that it doesn't have the same impacts on the students in the district as a whole? So I'm going to teach you a new term. We've come up with this. It's called the West Ada Transit System. It is not a shuttle. It is not a home-to-school route. So we're going to learn new terminology because this is the term I want us to use because we're still going to have shuttles. We're still going to have the midday shuttles. Students are still going to be riding those. Those are fine. It's really at the beginning and the end of the day, specifically with impacting Renaissance IFA and CTE students. So the last time we talked about we were going to run this system, and we were essentially going to go to every home high school, right? And so if you can make your home high school and you can drive there, then we'll pick you up and we'll make sure we run the shuttle service. We've changed that a little bit. I think through the input we've had, through the discussions we've had, we've essentially built this transit system. So the way we are doing routing is differently this year. And so we're going to have regional setups. So essentially what we're going to have is it's going to feel like public transportation. This bus and this route is going to visit elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools within the region of how they operate and how they route. And so our expectation is that all of the folks who will be riding those buses should be within the walking zone already of one of our local schools, as we have many. In the case it's not. So let's say we run into a situation, I heard about one where potentially it could be outside of the home high school area or even outside an elementary school. We're going to geocode those students and we're going to design community stops, so within our walking distance. So we'll be able to make sure that, okay, in this case we have some students who are attending Renaissance or IFA, and this is really when we start to really, it gets out in the north and the south, in our extreme areas where we start to say, oh, we don't have a school right near there, we need to design some community stops. And so you'll kind of see a process for us over the summer where we'll work with the principal and with our CTE director to identify those students specifically. So students affected, again, Renaissance, IFA, and CTE, if they're traveling at the beginning or the end of the day, they will essentially ride this West Ada Transit System shuttle, which will bounce around local schools and then transport the students directly to those schools. Again, kind of capturing that shuttle system, separating it out, so that now if we have a problem, let's say that bus got stuck in traffic, the Eagle High kids are not waiting. So they're not waiting for that shuttle to come. We'll send out a blackboard. We'll notify those parents that, hey, unfortunately, the bus got stuck in traffic, and our expectation is it's going to be a little late. But those students on that bus will be impacted, so parents will know. But again, it won't impact the other students and then work its way through and cascade down to the elementary students as well. Mr. Myers has already talked about athletics, and so we'll continue to work with the coaches and the ADs on those. And again, I think for us, the additional steps, we'll be doing a lot of great work this summer to make sure that we've identified those bus stops and those students who may not be within walking distance of one of our schools as defined by our policy. If they're not, we'll also try to do some survey work to make sure as much as we can, we identify all of those kids. Again, building the route system and the community stops to be able to capture everyone so they can just use walking distance. So what it should feel like is it's just a different bus stop. Whereas normally maybe your bus stop was here. Now it might be, I'll use Eagle Elementary again. You're going to go to Eagle Elementary to get picked up in the morning because the West Ada Transit system is going to pick you up and then take you to school. So I did want to talk, I think it'll give context if I talk a little bit about some other transportation changes we're making. And so really we are in the process of looking at how we route our students and the rerouting process in general. So we have generated some what we call dynamic routing, which is essentially setting up regions. What that means is that we've been looking at a reduction in bus stops. So in some of our bus routes, and this is communication that started to go out, but will continue to go out, we had as many as 15 bus stops on a route. And so we've tried to reduce those. We've looked at where we could have community stops, where we could identify bus stops, where we can have students that may need to walk a little bit further, but will increase really the efficiency and on-time percentage and predictability of our bus routes and when buses will arrive and when they should be at school. All things where I think we're going to be able to do. So the stops will look like they might be closer to the outer edge of subdivisions as we look to, again, gain that predictability and efficiency associated with the bus route, and looking at that from there. Transportation application, we've started to implement this process, so students who may not have ridden the bus in the past will submit an application. They can do it through PowerSchool. That will allow us to identify that student so we make sure that we get them captured. We have their information captured so we can make sure that we can identify a way to make sure that they have their bus stop well in advance of the year starting. I've talked a little about the new routing system. We're also going to have an app available for parents that'll come out in August. If you remember, as part of our contract adjustment process we had with Cascade, they talked a little bit about that app. That will also give parents a little bit of self-service process as well. And then keep your eyes out. There will be communication that'll go out throughout the summer. So our expectation is right now we are in the process of routing. I have a weekly discussion with Cascade about where they're at, what their deliverables are looking like, how are we doing with our routing, our design and setup. I think what you'll start seeing is that those bus stops will start populating, probably we'll say early to mid-July into people's PowerSchool, so they'll be able to see exactly where their bus stop is, and then we'll continue to kind of identify that and continue to work through those deliverables. And again, this is important not because it affects necessarily the routing changes we're making with Renaissance and IFA, but really is in conjunction with. And so a way for us to identify the challenges we've had this year and us to get creative on ways to help resolve those transportation challenges. And that is the same slide you just read, so we're not going to cover that again. And so I guess bus stop process, typically what happens with routing is those are approved as part of the review of transportation in the fall. So RD and I will come and give a presentation about that and talk about more specifically, here's the changes in bus stops as approved at the board. But we did kind of want to get a little bit of feedback just in general on the West Ada transit system. Again, we're going to remember to start learning those terms and what they feel like, and just make sure that it's comfortable with what the desire is of what you're looking for, and then we'll continue to implement and meet the needs of our students. With that, I can stand for any questions.
Going to make T-shirts, West Ada Transit.
I would love
Awesome
it.
Hats, the whole thing. That's great. Are there any questions or comments? Trustee Benetti?
So I really love the process because I love the creative thinking. I love the taking the feedback from the community and taking it into consideration. I think that's awesome. So the way that I was viewing this, and it's really interesting for me personally because I do live in Eagle, and my daughter's in 8th grade. She's considering Renaissance, right? And so that would directly impact her. And at the same token, I also have a daughter who we've had to forego the bus system because of that unpredictability. So you said the magic word for me, which is predictability, right? I mean, for me, it would be fine for it to be longer as long as it was predictable and I could count on it. And so if this is something that could increase the robustness and predictability of the system, we have to look at it as an entire system, right? I mean, as I've said before, it's always about trade-offs, right? There'll never be a magic solution. You always have to look at a trade-off. And so for me, it really seems like this is something that can improve the entire predictability of the system as a whole, which of course is something that we have to consider fairly strongly. I did want to ask one question though, because you mentioned that there was a walking distance, because you're going to have to create community stops. Of course, Star, there's not a lot of places in Star. There's a very, very dispersed geographic area. So what is your criterion for maximum distance? You sort of alluded to it, but I don't know if there is one, and if so, how long is it?
Chair and trustees. So there are some rules associated specifically under Idaho Code. We usually shoot much lower than those. And so I want to say it's 0.4 for elementary students and either 0.7 or a mile for secondary students. And so part of what we will do as part of that evaluation process is not only look at the community stop setup, but we'll also look at the safety of the stops. Because you brought up when you start getting out in Star, right, it's not like there's sidewalks everywhere. Right. And so that'll be part of the evaluation we'll do when we geocode the students. And I guess I should back up for a second just so everybody understands what geocode. Essentially, we'll pull their information from PowerSchool, we'll identify where their address is, and so we can make sure that routing is able to identify a good community stop or a place where we can put students, and then that will be part of the process over the summer. Our bus drivers will essentially be driving these routes as they're rebuilt to identify things such as hazards, to identify maybe the time frame that we thought for the route. You know, maybe we said it should take 30 minutes and it takes 35 minutes. Okay, is there changes we need to make? They'll also be looking at things as they drive those routes. What do we do if there's not sidewalks? Is there a way that we can design something or a way we can design the routing to be as safe as possible? So those are all things we'll be doing over the summer. Regardless of this, those are just changes in process, but now we'll add it to this process as well.
Okay, very good, because particularly listening to people's concerns about having to forego the opportunity that Renaissance is that's very hard pill to swallow. So if this is a creative solution that you think can increase the predictability and still overall manage the system as a whole while addressing those needs while imperfect, I really appreciate that you're thinking outside the box here.
Well, thank you. And really a lot of credit goes to two people. Dr. Bubb actually was one who came up with this idea, and then our transportation liaison, R.D. Huntley, has been implementing, and so credit to both of them for the awesome work.
Great. No, that's all I've got on that.
All right, are there any other comments? Vice Chair Zuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gill and I also support this transit system, and thank you for the idea, the options that you're given to parents to be able to continue to get their students to Renaissance and Idaho Fine Arts Academy. I also appreciate the flexibility that's being given to those principals as you work through what athletics look like for these students, because we know that that's an important piece for those that participate. So I really appreciate that, and I'm in full support. Thank you.
Any other comments? Trustee Redford?
The other trustees already said it, but I'll just say you guys are awesome. I continue to be impressed by your caring attitude and your willingness to listen to parents and just make it a collaborative effort to find logical solutions and creative solutions. So thank you. You're amazing.
Ditto. All right, thank you so much. This is great. I appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, and I feel bad saying Mr. Myers. It's your turn again. 23-24 calendar and patron input. And I say I feel bad because he has an injury to his foot, so it's a long walk up there.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Bubb. All right. This is the second conversation around the 23-24 school calendar, and this all stems from a conversation when decisions were made about the 22-23 school year calendar, where through a level of intentional planning and input from our stakeholders and input from our school leaders and patrons, what could we do to create a 23-24 school calendar so far ahead of time that it would allow for family planning, it would allow for opportunities to be transparent with the public as far as what future plans would look like, and then how our school teams can gauge for that time frame as well. Some of that was around two proposals. I just want to provide some historical context because of the data that I'm bringing to you from stakeholder input. So those two proposals really were through the lens of one, which was a traditional student calendar in West Ada, which looks like the first semester ending about the third week in January. We go into winter holiday break, the semester's not over with yet. We return after spring break and finish out the semester as we move into second semester at the end of January. And there are benefits and opportunities and challenges with both of these schedules. And then again, with that traditional student calendar, you look at teachers returning about the second to third week in August. You're looking at students returning at about the third week of August, and you're looking at an end of year time frame about after Memorial Day, the week after Memorial Day, first week of June in that time frame. What was presented was a possible option, and this option came about based on stakeholder and patron teacher feedback in terms of what would a schedule look like if we ended a semester before winter holiday break. There's a natural transition there. What would that look like? How would that impact the calendar? How would that impact not only student learning calendars, but then our staff working calendars at the same time? So how soon would a teacher return? How soon would a staff member return from that summer break? And then at one point, would they be released from that working calendar at the end of the school year? And so what you have before you are those two options. The first one, option one, really being that winter break where semester ends before winter break option. And then the second option really being around that more traditional opportunity. So what we did was put together the calendars, presented it to you so you have an opportunity to take a look at it. And then we presented it to the public. Through the public, it included all stakeholders, including staff, students, and parents, and any patrons who wanted to weigh in on the calendar. Through that, we did receive a number of results. And so as an overview, this is an action item tonight to approve the 23-24 school calendar to allow for, basically we're releasing the student calendar as each school year ends prior to that. And so it gives a full year for planning and opportunity that way. And then to also review the stakeholder input results of where we received 2,652 total respondents. Again, those two options that we talked about, this is actually a snapshot right from that survey where it clearly outlines when a teacher's return day is, the first day of school, when first semester ends, and when the last day of school would be under both of those options. Part of the variance, excuse me one second. There were some initial assumptions when we started looking at instructional minutes. I think that's important to point out. And something when we really started digging into the instructional minutes, where we identified that this variance between the return days isn't as large of a variance as we anticipated. The reason for that is capturing instructional minutes on a common calendar and a common bell schedule across our sites. That allows for this opportunity of flexible minutes of instructional minutes, similar to what I had talked about previously in bell schedule around the minimum instructional minutes and what is extra in West data based on our calendars. This is a snapshot from the survey data in terms of who responded and numbers within each stakeholder. We're just under 1,600 were parent guardian, just over 300 were students, and about 750 employees responded on the survey. The survey itself asked just a few questions, and the question was, of the two options, which do you prefer? And stakeholders could just click on the link and it would bring up the preferred calendar, and then there was a summary around the calendar between option one and option two. And then the survey also basically asked two open-ended questions, which were, of the one that you picked that you prefer, why did you select that calendar, so that we could collect that data that way. And then the other piece was, is there anything in addition you believe the calendar committee should think about or the board should think about when approving that calendar and taking a look at the committee? I do want to let just stakeholders and patrons know who are listening in and that all of that information, including every open-ended response, was provided to the board and was analyzed by district executive team and which option to bring before this evening. Again, the breakdown of who selected what calendar option, really it was about a 70-30 split, where calendar option one was 70% of the respondents and 30% was option two of those respondents. Just to remind everybody, option one is that semester ending before winter break calendar option. When you break down the individual respondents between parents, students, and staff, it's a similar percentage breakdown. Not exactly, but very similar. In that with parents, this broke down at about 65-35% for option one. With students, it was an 82 to about an 18% breakdown. And with staff, it was about a 76% to a 24% breakdown that way. So very similar to the overall results. I provided a summary of additional considerations, both with opportunities and challenges. I do want to be very transparent in that within both calendars, and in fact any calendar, there's going to be some benefits and some drawbacks to both calendars. I just quickly want to review some of these through the context of teaching and learning. The opportunity of the option one calendar, is that it does provide a logical end to a semester instructional block. It seems to make sense within an instructional time period. I do want to be transparent that it is less instructional days in the first semester than in the second semester. In second semester, some of those instructional days are used as assessment opportunities, especially within the month of May, and so within an instructional calendar, we are able to make up that time frame that way. Some of those challenges is there are less summer days in the break. The summer days are, again, it's not as many as we had previously anticipated, but it is less. Transition and prep time for teachers and staff are built into that calendar. You're going to notice that on option 1, we very intentionally put a prep time for teachers before winter break, and then a prep and planning time before they come back for winter break. And we did that on purpose, or the committee did that on purpose, because we recognize that we don't want teachers and staff leaving for holiday break with the intention of, while you're on holiday break, please wrap up your report cards, please wrap up final grading and gathering that up. We wanted to create a day, and it is very specifically lined out in the calendar that this is meant for prep time for teachers, both in leaving for winter break and returning from winter break that way. But again, in order to do that, it is an earlier start time for teachers, and the on-contract time and getting the classroom ready, there is less time for that, but we can carve out that time specifically for teachers as well and dedicate some of that early classroom prep time in August. Opportunities, the school does end prior to Memorial Day holiday. That has been a concern in the past, where there's a few days after the Memorial holiday that don't seem to make a lot of sense. That's also a benefit when we go to schedule graduations in there as well, because the community wants to use a lot of those forums that we use as well, and so we provide some opportunity there. But it does conflict with summer activities like 4-H, FFA, and sports camps in the community and in the valley. With an earlier return date for students, it is going to impact that, although minimally and not as much as we thought. There will be an impact. It does provide some alignment with our neighboring districts' calendars. We use the districts around us as models to help develop some of this calendar as a starting point. And so there is better alignment, although not perfect alignment to be transparent, but there is alignment with that. The spring break, the comment around challenges, spring break doesn't align with holidays. There are some holidays right around that spring break time that some people choose to celebrate, and so as a result of that, that doesn't necessarily line up with spring break. In our current calendar, the way it stands, those still don't align up, so there is still that lack of alignment that way. Assessment scheduling at the end of second semester with additional days. It allows us to build some of the end of year assessments, which do pull from that core instructional time frame. It gives us some additional time frame for those because there are more of those as we move forward, not only for state's requirements, but through our own benchmarking requirements. But again, like I mentioned, there is a small imbalance of instructional days at second semester. And then professional learning days are aligned with Wednesday collaboration days through this calendar. Please note that that is true about the 22-23 calendar as well. But that does provide, when you run professional learning days on a Wednesday rather than a Monday or Friday, that does create some childcare challenges, and just want to be very transparent that the committee did think of that. However, the opportunity to align those days on Wednesdays with late start felt like a level of importance that we want to present that in the calendars as well. And so with those additional considerations and the data behind what we received from patrons, staff, students, and our parents, the recommendation from the administration team is to approve the option 1 calendar, where the semester ends before winter break, given that those opportunities outweigh the challenges. And then should minor adjustments be needed, need to be made due to unforeseen things that happen within the scope of a time frame, we will bring those to the board, and we will do our absolute best that those don't impact holiday breaks or start dates, but just want to be very transparent that a calendar is what it is, and sometimes minor adjustments need to be made. But because we're dedicated to long-range staff and family planning, we'll do everything we can not to touch those major holiday break timeframes. And I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have or any additional conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any comments or questions? Vice Chair Zuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Myers. I think those results by stakeholder are really telling. I think that goes to show that students, it's a struggle to come back and finish your semester after Christmas break. And I think the teachers, it shows in the teachers' input as well. And it's the parent results that pull that number down overall. As a parent, I can understand and don't necessarily want to lose summer days with my kids either. But I think that it's best for our students and our staff. I'm really supportive of that. my challenge, and I'm supportive of that tonight, my challenge is that I haven't heard a word about this from the community, which makes me concerned that people don't really know about it. Our survey results were pretty low overall, if you look at that. I didn't personally get the email as a parent, and I may have missed it. There's a lot of communication. I'm okay moving forward, but I think we need to do a good job getting in front of this. We have plenty of time to share it and get it out there. But when our neighbors made the change, our neighbor district made the change, it hit the news. There were businesses that were upset because they were losing staff, parents. It was a big impact, less for us because of the day. I mean, we worked really carefully in the calendar. But I do think that I haven't received a single email, which tells me that maybe people don't know. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Trustee Benetti.
So just to make sure that I'm clear on the assessment piece, there's not going to be any impact in terms of, we're not going to bump like a formative assessment from the first semester to the second semester. Is that correct? Or help me understand what the assessment impact was specifically.
Madam Chair, Trustee Benetti, that is correct. We will not move a formative assessment from one to the other. There are some end-of-year assessments that aren't part of our benchmarking. For example, ISAT,
summative. Adding
science into that increases the time that we assess students. Because all students at certain grade levels take that assessment, it has a greater impact overall on the school, the time frames that the school is doing that, and regardless of that. We have structures in place to not impact as much instructional time as possible, but that is the reality of end of school and what that can look like. In addition to that, end of school year events that tend to impact instructional timeframes that we want to carve out and create a specific time for that way. But through careful instructional planning within a scope and sequence calendar, we can help counterbalance that as much as possible between first semester and second. The other challenge with a calendar that ends before winter holiday break is there is an imbalance of A day, B day. So in our A day, B day calendar at high schools, there is a bit of an imbalance with that. What we can do is look carefully at A day, B day and help gauge for that a little bit as well within that. Right. And although that's approved as part of the calendar, the A day, B day is a systemic piece that we do.
But I'm assuming that there's not going to be any, there's not going to be any like sacrifice of something that would normally happen in a first semester that would otherwise happen in a second semester, pedagogically or content-wise or anything like that. It's otherwise the same.
Trustee, that is correct.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? No. Oh, go ahead. Vice Chair Zuna.
Sorry, can I ask one more question on, for AP classes where they take that test early, this should help, right? Because we're getting more of those instructional minutes up front.
Madam Chair, Trustee,
prior to the test.
That is our assumption as well.
Okay, thank you.
And we will plan for that as well.
I had kind of a unique opportunity to talk to quite a few people in my zone on this and heard 100% people were excited about that option of ending before Christmas. So I really appreciate you taking this time to go through it, and I think this could be a good thing for the district.
Madam Chair, thank you. It'll take some careful planning, but we have a year to do it and a year to communicate it out well.
Thank you so much. Now we can look at taking action. And I would entertain any motions regarding the 22-23 bell schedule. Vice Chair Zuna.
Madam Chair, I would move that we approve the 22-23 bell schedule.
Do I have a second? Trustee Redford.
I second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. I'd now entertain a motion regarding the 23-24 calendar. Trustee Redford.
Motion to approve the 2023-24 calendar.
Is there a second? Trustee Benetti.
I second that.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Trustee Redford.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Vice Chair Zuna, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Are there any future agenda items anyone would like to see? Excellent. And I would now entertain a motion to adjourn. Trustee Redford.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Trustee Benetti.
I second that motion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Have a good night.